So good morning, everyone. I think I recognise a few names on the list, but I'm absolutely delighted to hear. And Trevor, it was lovely to hear what you're doing on the Male Allies side. I hope we can connect separately on this. So I'm going to talk about how to use International Men's Day to drive positive change in the workplace. So I'm the co-founder of Token Man, but I'm also the founder of Token Man Consulting. So Token Man Consulting was launched 4 months ago specifically to engage men with inclusion and diversity. So of all the work, I've been in the inclusion and diversity space for 5 years, and in all the work I've done, the biggest barrier to change is men that look like me or have had experiences similar to me. So often the in-group, and Trevor just talked about it just now, the in-group cannot see the exclusion that currently exists within the workplace. So I'm going to talk about International Men's Day. Let's talk about the elephant in the room first, which is this. But some say every day is International Men's Day. I don't think I go through a week without someone saying to me, but every day is an International Men's Day. So I'm going to dispel that myth. I'm going to talk about why that comment is one, misleading. I just don't think it's true. But also I'm going to talk about why it's actually quite damaging to make that comment, to talk about it being everyone's day. So I'm going to really talk about the reasons to mark International Men's Day. And for those people that maybe do believe in that, and hopefully I will dispel the myth. But the one thing I would say is that I've been doing events now for 5 years around International Men's Day, and I've never celebrated International Men's Day. I've always marked it. So I don't know whether that language helps you, but I always talk about celebrating International Women's Day and marking International Men's Day. It's a small but quite important distinction, because actually, to that quote before, I don't think we need to celebrate men, but what we need to do is understand some of the challenges they're facing. But let me say why, the main reason why I think that comment actually is quite, it's just, I just don't believe it. And that's this, it's been talked about quite a lot this morning, which is intersectionality. You know, let's be really clear, is every day, for someone like me, is every day Men's Day? The answer is probably yes. I totally accept that, but I don't represent all men, and men are intersectional. So a gay man is still a man, a black man is still a man, someone with disabilities is still a man. And so we do have to recognize that intersectionality, and often because of that intersectionality, people have various challenges that are important to be reflected actually around International Men's Day. And secondly, we can't talk about this, inclusion is for everyone, without including everyone. You know, it's so important, and I do so many talks within businesses around inclusion is for everyone, around getting men to engage. And once we can talk about inclusion, they can feel included, they can feel heard. It's amazing what a difference it makes in terms of their engagement and how they might help us drive change. And, you know, the reality is, we all know this. We know that women cover significantly. And again, if we go intersectional, it gets even higher. If you're a woman of colour, for example, but even men are covering. So this is a masculine to the workplace research we've done for the last 3 years. We're doing another piece of work this year. Is 42% of men feel they have to mark part of themselves to fit in. 58% under 35s feel they have to mark parts of themselves to fit in, and 49% of Black, Asian and people of colour respondents feel they have to mark parts of themselves to fit in. So you can see here a significant amount of men themselves are having to cover. And I think too often we just assume that when we talk about covering, it just is the marginalised, historically marginalised groups or women. Actually, men do cover as well. We do see poor mental health in the workplace for men. So 70% of all respondents back in 2020 thought men being taught to suppress feelings negatively impacts mental health. And actually 62% of all respondents think men being taught to suppress feelings negatively impacts relationships. So we are seeing significant mental health. We are seeing more people, and there is, unfortunately, there is a horrible stat when we talk about mental health. 125 people in the UK take their lives every week, of which 75% of those are men. Yes, here's the stat here from Calm. And this is a stat pre-COVID. I would have thought, if anything, it's gone up post-COVID. And certainly with the people that I speak to, they don't want to go to a world where they're not spending as much time with their kids' fathers. 87% of men wish they could spend more time with their children. And let's be really clear, I think it was talked to before, but you know, one of the biggest challenges that workplaces have is they just aren't inclusive to primary caregivers. And we know that if we're going to get gender equality, we do need to get more men to take that primary caregiver role. And so we do have to be talking about these issues, and having a time to talk about these issues, I think, is really, really important. But this is, Trevor's already talked about it, he's put the stat here. This is the key reason for marking International Men's Day, which is companies where men are actively involved in gender diversity, 96% report progress. Conversely, among companies where men are not involved, only 30% show progress. So given International Men's Day exists, why would you miss the opportunity to engage men around the work that we're all doing to create more inclusive and diverse workplaces? So that's why we've done an event on International Men's Day for the last 5 years, and I'll talk about it as we come through. So very quickly, I'm sure you're all planning themes for International Men's Day. These are the themes that are on the site. So I tend to go much more with the UK site. So per the UK site, it's making a positive difference to the well-being and lives of men and boys. It's raising awareness and or funds for charity supporting men and boys' well-being, and promoting a positive conversation about men, manhood and masculinity. And that conversation is really, really important. We have seen examples of men coming through who aren't delivering that more positive side. And in fact, that's a lot of the work that we're going to be doing as Token over the next 12 months, is really bringing to the fore examples of what I'd call more modern positive masculinity. But if I look at the clients that I'm working with at the moment, but also the work that we do in Masculine to the Workplace, the kind of themes that we're looking at the moment, we're exploring, are firstly mental health. I think if you don't do something around mental health to mark International Men's Day, you're just missing a trick in terms of how people are feeling within the workplace. I actually spoke to a client only last week who it's a relatively small client. They have had 3 attempted suicides in their teams, all men, in the last 6 months. So this is a real risk for people. So really understanding that and actually speaking specifically around some of the challenges men face around mental health that can be very different, I think is really important. I think marking International Men's Day is about getting men to understand how they can be a better ally to inclusion diversity. That's really, if I look at that middle one, that's really what we use it for. We are trying to get men into the room to get them to understand how the patriarchy damages everyone and how they can actually become part of making it changing the system to benefit almost everyone. And the third area is vulnerability. So in all the work I do and all the men I speak to and senior leaders, vulnerability is still the key area. And again, I know Deloitte don't have vulnerability in their 6 inclusive leadership skills. They have courage. I much prefer the word vulnerability to courage, because if you ask a senior leader, can they be courageous? They will all say yes. But if you say, can you be vulnerable? The answer invariably is no. So I'm going to talk about 5 things you can do to mark International Men's Day. But before I do that, I'm just going to ask you to pop into chat what you're doing. I'd love you to pop into chat what you're doing to mark International Men's Day. Okay, so we're seeing some people undecided, not sure. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. Hopefully this will happen to you. Currently nothing. Yeah, so we're seeing, I'm hoping this will be helpful to you and we'll get some other things. So please keep on popping in. I'm just going to give you 5 things you can do. So the first thing you can do is you can run your own International Men's Day panel. So we talk about vulnerability, we talk about mental health. If you can get senior leaders to get on the stage and talk about some of their own challenges, talk about how they've engaged with IND, talk about their own vulnerability, that probably is the most powerful thing you can do. Actually hearing senior leaders in your business being vulnerable, talking about some of these big issues, I think is extremely powerful. Secondly, use the day to recognise the challenges your male staff are facing so they feel included, or simply ask the men in your team how they are feeling. So even just saying, Happy International Men's Day, how are you feeling today? And then when they say, okay, how are you really feeling, is usually the follow-up question I'd always ask, because the one thing I know from my own personal experience is my wife asked me, how I am, I don't tend to tell her the truth. I will always just say okay. There's actually an exercise that I run with men where I actually get them to look at the feelings wheel, and they actually then talk about what feeling they're feeling. It's a really good technique for just getting people to think about what they're truly feeling. Number 3 is run some targeted men's circles to allow men to share their feelings. With Token Man Consulting, we are increasingly creating men-only spaces to allow men to speak more openly without fear of being judged or saying the wrong things. So you could create some men's circles. You could create one. I would assume I would recommend you bring in a specialist, but someone's maybe to a men's circles to talk about mental health. You could bring in a men's circle for fathers specifically and get fathers to actually share some of their stories. Number 4 is use the day to challenge norms. I did write it on my LinkedIn page. There was Caitlin Moran's book. She talks about the fact that men never get flowers. And I think that evening, when I read that book, a friend of mine came and he gave me a bunch of sunflowers. It was the first time I'd ever got flowers in my life. So simple things like just giving men flowers and challenging some of those stereotypes that currently exist, I think would be a good way to actually mark International Men's Day. And finally, we do actually, I talked about our event. We run an event every year. It's my favorite event of the year, but I'm biased. Over the last 3 years, it has had an average score of 9.1 out of 10. I mean, literally, that's the average over 4 years. The feedback we get is incredible. Getting men engaged is really, really impactful and really effective. I'll send a code into chat in a minute. Here are some of our speakers. We have James O'Brien, we have Laura Bates, who's the founder of Everyday Sexism. We have Christopher Ville, who wrote The Whole Man, and is going to talk specifically around vulnerability. And we have a generational panel. And here are some of our partners. I know some of these partners because Vanessa's actually introduced me to them. Some of these partners are also part of this network, but it just gives you a good idea of what kind of companies are coming and getting involved. And if you are interested in partnership, please let me know. So I'm just going to pop the link in. You do get a 50% discount with We Are the City. I love this quote. I heard this about 3 years ago, and I think it kind of summarizes the work that a lot of the work that we're doing at Token Man Consulting, which is in order to emancipate women, you need to liberate men. I think the holy grail for actually creating and accelerating true change is at getting the men truly engaged and making them change makers. So thank you.